All right, welcome back to the Outdoor Adventures Podcast. I've got with me in the studio today a really special guest, and Jay Yellas. And Jay is a retired professional bass fisherman, and his career spanned from 1989 till 2022, I believe. And Jay won in 2002 the Bassmaster Classic at Alabama's Lay Lake, and we'll talk about that in a little more detail. He was also Angler of the Year in 2003 for Bassmaster, and Angler of the Year twice with FLW in 2002 and in 2007. He also received a 2003 ESPY for the Most Outstanding Outdoor Athlete, and was inducted into the Bass Fishing Hall of Fame in 2020. So quite a storied career, and it's just awesome to have a guy like you here local that's willing to come and talk to us.
Thanks, Sam. I'm glad to be your guest today and look forward to chatting with you.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, I've done a lot of research on Jay, and this is the first time we actually got to meet each other face-to-face. We've talked on the phone a few times, and we actually have a lot of commonalities with each other. So, first of all, our faith. So we both believe in Jesus Christ as the Son of God and died for our sins, and so we're both Christians. Amen. Yeah, so that's awesome to have a fellow brother in Christ that's willing to come and talk with us, but also that shares some of the same passions that I do. And so, the way I've kind of organized our talk today is just to talk about our faith a little bit, talk about our family, and then talk about fishing. We also share a similar education background. So I went to Oregon State University, got a fisheries and wildlife degree. I saw that your background was you got a degree in resource recreational management. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. I probably got my degree before you got yours, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, mine was in 87.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I was 10 years old in 89 when you started fishing. Yeah. So, yeah. So, quite a storied career, and he's doing a lot of awesome things in the community. So the first question that I have to you is, around your faith. So, when did Jesus become part of your life, and how did your faith keep you going during the good times and bad times?
Well, that's a great question. And, I got saved in February 28th of 1993. And that was the day that I invited Jesus Christ into my heart, made him my Lord and Savior, and surrendered my life and my fishing career and my family and everything to him. And, repented for my sins and asked him for, God's forgiveness. And that only comes through faith in his Son, Jesus Christ, and his death on the cross and the blood that he shed for our sins. And through faith in him, God forgives us for anything that we've done, and we're made whole and into a perfect right relationship with God. So I've found that to be totally the truth. And that's been like 30 years ago. Yeah, 30 years ago. So I've been a born again believer for 30 years, and I still remember the day that I surrendered my life to the Lord, and it's just been a great run. And he's right there, been right there with me the whole time through the thick and thin, the highs and lows of life, and the hard times and the good times. And he promises that he'll be there with us. His Holy Spirit will always comfort us and be with us no matter what we're going through. And then life can really throw some curveballs at you, and there's a lot of suffering in this world, but God promises he's right there with us to bring us his peace and comfort the whole time, and he's been so faithful to me and my family.
Yeah, that's awesome. So that was 4 years into your fishing carear then? Was that what you said, 1993?
Yeah, about 4 years. And my testimony, I'll just briefly go through it, but I was raised in the Episcopal Church, and I knew about Jesus. I knew who he was, but I didn't know him personally and have a relationship with him. And so I started off in my fishing career very selfish, self-seeking, and self-serving, wanting to just do what I wanted to do. And it was all about me. You know what I mean? Yeah. And about what I could accomplish and my dreams and me. And at that time I was a young angler coming up. I looked up to the veteran guys on the pro circuit and what their philosophies were about life and different things. And there weren't any really strong Christian guys that were doing really well on the trail back then. So I got caught up following these guys that were like into New Age and all kinds of the power of self, and just followed that for a few years, and just it never clicked for me because it's not the truth. I mean, and then when I heard the gospel for the first time, I just received it with joy, and I know I had some people praying for me too throughout that time. And then I remember we have each tournament on the pro circuit, we have a Fellowship of Christian Angler meeting, and I was invited to that by the chaplain, and he had to invite me 4 or 5 times before I finally came. He never gave up. Yeah. And I finally came, and I heard the gospel, and he asked, I remember he asked he prayed the sinner's prayer with everybody about what we talked about earlier about, forgiveness of sin and accepting Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior as payment for your sins. And it's all by faith. And I remember raising my hand that day and praying that the sinner's prayer, and right then and there, God entered my life, and the Holy Spirit was with me from there on.
That's
and
awesome.
And then things really started to click in my tournament fishing, and I started really having a lot of success, and because that was for His glory, not mine.
Yeah.
And it's funny how you get to you try on your own to do it, and you can never quite get to where you want to be. But when I surrendered my life to the Lord, He just blessed my fishing, and I started winning and doing very well in the tournaments. And He was establishing me in order that I'd have a platform to share His love with other fishermen around the country. And that's kind of how it all went. It's all about Jesus.
That's so exciting to hear you share that, because when I've been researching on you before preparing for today, just reading your articles, you always gave glory to God. It wasn't ever about you. You were always putting the shine on God and Jesus. And I mean, I know you worked really hard and you have a really amazing career, but He was there with you. And part of the thing we talk about on this show is, for me, nature is an extension of God, and so when I'm out in nature and His creation, if you will, and I get to see all the amazing things that He's created, and just the intricacies of the connections between all the things out in biology, for me, it's almost like an admiration of God and what He's created, or it just kind of does something for my soul being out there. Did you have that experience when you were out fishing too?
Oh yeah, all the time. I mean, that's one of the best things about a career as a professional fisherman is you're outdoors in God's creation all the time, and it's just something special. I mean, I think we're created to do that. We're, sitting inside a room and looking at a computer monitor all day is not nearly as fulfilling as being out in the outdoors, no doubt. So, the other thing I just want to mention, I mentioned how God blessed my fishing career, but the other thing that goes hand in hand with that is the work ethic and just doing everything that you can possibly do to be successful. And I trained for competitive fishing like I was training for the Olympics. In my mind, I was so focused, and it's all I did. So it's not just, God blessed my fishing career in a big way, but I had to do my part too.
Yeah.
They go hand in hand. You got to do everything try real hard like everything depends on you, and pray really hard like everything depends on God. And you put those two things together and good things happen.
That's a great combination. And then you got a stat sheet like we're looking at today.
Yeah.
That's spectacular. So let's talk about your family a little bit. When you were out touring, you don't see a lot of fishermen from the West Coast. We're kind of away from where those tournaments are. It's quite a ways to get to bass fishing. There's not a lot of people that bass fish. What's funny about our show is a lot of the guys that are on here are bass fishermen, because we just started doing it. I recently started about 2 years ago, just kayak fishing, like I was sharing with you before we got started. So talk about how that was for the family, how you guys navigated that as a family, as I know you've got 2 daughters and your wife. And so as you were out there fishing on a really high level, what did that look like for the family?
Yeah, I've got two great daughters, and they're both out of college now and doing well. I've got a grandson even by my oldest daughter, Hannah. And so growing up, though, we tried to get the kids to travel as much as they could when they were little to the tournaments, because I was on the road a couple weeks a month during the tournament season, which is a lot of travel. So when the girls were young, they would come with Jill and I to as many tournaments as possible. And then once they, got in 5th or 6th grade and into middle school, then things really slowed down as they got busy with sports and drama and different things at school. And so that cut down, on how much they could travel. And the older they got, the more plugged in they were into their local community. And so they would, by the time they were in high school, they would just come to like the big tournaments, the Classic and the Forestwood Cup and different things in the summertime when school was out. And then maybe during spring break they'd hit the road too. But we were always able to make it really well. I mean, with technology nowadays, we could FaceTime every night and talk on the cell phones and keep in touch. And so it all worked great. Some of the guys on the circuit, they homeschool their kids when they're young, so they can spend more time with them. But and that's quite a popular option actually for the guys on the circuit. But yeah, family is number one in my life after my relationship with God. So we got a really strong family unit, and love my girls, done a lot of fun stuff with them. I enjoyed coaching some of their softball as they were going through high school and middle school, and basketball and different things like that. And they're doing well. And we do a lot of stuff as a family, and those are the best times of the year. Really, is when you take your family vacations and do stuff together as a family. And the key with girls, you got to make time to get them fishing when the fishing is good. Excuse me. And I kind of learned the trick to doing that. They don't getting your kids out on the water is something that's very important, but you don't there's a right way and a wrong way to do it. The wrong way to do it is to get them up at 3 a.m. and drive 2 hours and fish all day and then in the rain and then drive home. That's the right way to do it is you always take them fishing, maybe get a late start and go out and fish for 3 hours, catch some fish, and then you always want to go in before they're ready to go in so that it leaves them longing for more. And that's really a key deal. Is it's just the opposite of keeping them out there too long. You want to go in early before they're ready to go in, and that way they'll want to go with you next time.
That's awesome. That's good advice. So when you were in these tournaments, I noticed you lived in Texas for a period of time. So let's talk about, Oregon was your home you went to college at Oregon State, and then you started fishing right out of college, right? On the professional tour. And so a lot of the tournaments are Midwest or East Coast or? Yeah,
they're in the eastern half of the country, primarily in the Southeast. But in the summer we'd go up to Michigan and New York and places like that.
And then, so let's dive into your fishing career a little bit. So that was the other question I had. So when you're let's say you were going to a tournament and you're in Oregon at that time, are you flying all your gear out there? Are you taking a big tour bus? How do you get all your stuff
That's a good question. So I would, the last 15 years of my career, I lived in Oregon. And prior to that, I spent 17 years in Texas just to get closer and more centrally located. Mm-hmm. And but the last 15 years, I kept my boat and my truck in Texas. And so, or wherever the next tournament was going to be, and I'd fly back and forth. So typically, if we had a tournament, say, in Texas, and then the next one was in South Carolina after the tournament in Texas, I'd drive to South Carolina, leave my boat with a friend, and then fly back here. And then I'd fly back to South Carolina and fish, and then the next tournament might be in Missouri, and I'd drive to Missouri and leave the boat with a friend. And the thing is, I've done that after doing it for 30 years. You have friends all over the country, and dropping your boat at someone's house for a couple weeks is not a problem. So that's how I did it. Yeah, the drive is just too much to drive from here to. It's like 3 or 4 days back to the in the southeast.
Yeah, well, and Brent Norlander was on the show a couple of weeks ago, and he said, Jay, you don't realize it, but this guy is like if he goes over on that part of the world, his face is on the lures in the stores. Like, people know who this guy is. He goes, it's like going around with a professional, anything else, because you're pretty famous out on that part of the world. Yeah,
Oregon and bass fishing don't really. It's not, or the state isn't synonymous with bass fishing. We're known in Oregon for salmon, steelhead, trout primarily. We've got some good bass fishing, notably like the Columbia River and some other, that's our best fishery for bass with smallmouth. But then there's some decent largemouth fishing on a comparative basis to the rest of the nation in Oregon. But yeah, in the southeast, that's all they have is the bass and freshwater fish like crappie and brim and catfish. And then they have the ocean too, the Gulf. But Oregonians aren't really into bass fishing. I know they have tournaments up here. I know because I fished them when I was in college at Oregon State, and they still have them today. But they're lightly attended. They get 30 to 50 boats in a tournament, and it's actually Oregon's I think it's one of the very few states, might be the only state in America that does not have a bass boat dealer in the state of Oregon.
Yeah.
I mean, that pretty much says it all right there.
There's a lot of aluminum boats and a lot of boats built for rivers, but yeah, you're right. So, and I noticed that you helped out with Oregon State University bass fishing team from time to time. I don't know if you're still doing that.
I do. Yeah, I was down there a couple weeks ago talking to those guys, and I was been with them since they've started that in 2009. And I like to go down and visit with them and see the new faces, and it's turned over a lot over the years, like any college sport does. But bass fishing is just at a collegiate level is just on a club basis, and but it's actually college fishing has become a big deal nationwide. They have very competitive, like a national championship, and we've had some kids from Oregon State compete in the national championship. In fact, this year, 2 of the kids qualified and drove all the way to Florida to compete in the national championship. So some really stellar fishermen at Oregon State. And the Ducks used to have a fishing team, but I guess they lost interest in it. They don't have the kids because they haven't had a bass club in about 4 years, maybe 5 years. But for a while there, from like 2009 to 2016 or so, I would organize a bass fishing civil war each year between the Ducks and Beavers, and I'd get some of my friends with bass boats, and the kids would come out. We'd have a fun tournament. We've had that on the Columbia, on the Willamette, at Fern Ridge, Cottage Grove Lake, Fern Ridge. So that was a lot of fun. Hopefully the Ducks will get a team again one day and we'll be able to reignite the bass fishing civil war.
Yeah, get the rivalry going again. Yeah, that's awesome. So I'm going to go back to the beginning here and just talk to you about how you started fishing. Just, who first put a rod in your hand? Did you just, come out of your mama's womb and start fishing, or was there more to it than that?
Well, my grandfathers were the first ones really to tip me fishing. I can remember fishing with my paternal grandfather he lived in New York, and we'd fish on Sandy Pond, which is a lake off of Lake Ontario. And I remember fishing with him and catching my first bass on a jitterbug off of his dock. That's a topwater lure, and that kind of got me hooked. And I was a little guy back then. And then my maternal grandfather retired in Lincoln City, and so I can still remember him taking me out on a salmon charter boat out at Tradewinds Charters in Depot Bay when I was about 5 years old, and I can still remember what we caught that day and how the wind changed directions and all. I mean, so they started me, and then my dad, he liked to fish. He was not an avid angler, but he enjoyed fishing, and so he'd take me. And then in high school, I had a good friend that was, he and I started really fishing like every weekend. So, and then I had a mentor that taught me how to fish all through high school and college. And he was our old retired gentleman that was very savvy when it came to come to bass fishing, and he retired on Lake Cachuma in Southern California, and he would fish that lake 5 days a week. That's what he did in his retirement, and he was just a wealth of information. This is back before the internet, and it was hard to learn the sport those days, and now it's super easy. But back then, you had to learn how to catch fish from another human being.
Yeah, you weren't watching YouTube videos on how to tie up different rigs. And
so that's how I got started for me, and I was very fortunate to have a great mentor, Bill Cedar, who taught me so much about the ways of the bass, and how they respond to the environmental changes and how to catch them.
So how did you go from, that level to being on the West Coast and saying, I'm going to be a tournament bass fisherman? Like, how did that aspiration?
Yeah, that's a good question, because when I was in high school, I went to high school in Santa Barbara, California, and that's where I met Bill Cedar, my fishing mentor, and that's kind of where I got started bass fishing. But then I came to college at Oregon State, and I started fishing a lot up here. And I think when I was in high school is when I had the vision of becoming a professional bass fisherman. And I remember telling my parents about it, and they didn't have a clue of that you could even make a living doing it. And they said, well, you do whatever you want, follow your dreams, but you should get a college education first, which is sage advice. Even today, it's really solid advice, and college is even more appealing now that there's competitive fishing clubs in college, bass fishing clubs. And so, yeah, that's how it all started.
And then let's fast forward to 2002. So I saw the pictures of your wife and your daughters when you won the 2002 Bassmaster Classic, and everybody's smiling at the end and you're holding a trophy. But really kind of a historic tournament. Like, the things you did in that tournament over those days hadn't really been done before. Like we talked before we got started, you were the first one to get the daily big bass every single day in the tournament. And that just doesn't happen.
That doesn't happen. It's still the only time it's ever happened in the history of competitive fishing. And the reason is it's just, we're not out there trying to catch the biggest fish of the day. We're trying to catch, a solid 3 or 4 pound average. And usually the big fish is pretty random. It's just, somebody gets lucky, makes a lucky cast and catches a 7-pound bass. And there aren't many of those out there in the lake. So to catch the biggest fish is, and so it's just to me, it's just you have in the Classic, there was 50 other competitors. So you had a 1 in 50 chance to catch the big fish one day. And then to do it all 3 days, it's, 1 in 50 times 50 times 50. So that's a really high number. I don't know.
Yeah.
So that's why it's never happened before. It's like, the odds of it are really long odds. But yeah, it was just meant to be. That was my 12th Classic that I'd fished, and I'd finished as high as 3rd in the past, but never really been close to winning it. And it was just in God's perfect timing. It was my turn to win, and when it's your turn, you can't stop it. I mean, things are going to happen. It's meant to be.
That momentum was just, the wind was behind you, if you will.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, and I also read that you were the 4th guy, and the last time it happened was 1984, that went wire to wire that day, which means like you started in the lead and you finished in the lead. Right? Nobody ever caught up to you.
Yeah, that's how it went, and it happens like that every now and then, but it's pretty unusual. It just happened. I was just returned from the Classic in Tennessee last week, and we had a wire-to-wire winner this year. But it's most unusual. It usually doesn't happen that way, but it did the year I won also.
Yeah, that's had to be quite an experience to be at the top of the class. Like the elite athlete in your group. And
that's a dream come true. It's like winning the Super Bowl or the World Series. That's the biggest fishing tournament in the world each year. And it's not just a tournament. The whole industry is gathered there in that city for that event. They have a huge Classic Expo. It's a big outdoor show, and every fishing manufacturer is there with a with a booth and displays of boats and all the tackle and electronics and clothing and you name it. If it has anything to do with fishing, everybody's there. So it's a big celebration of bass fishing, and to win it is just a phenomenal, dream come true. And that was like 20 years ago, and it's still a big deal. I mean, it's a small number of people that have ever won that tournament. There's been a few guys that won it more than once, but not many. I think there's only been like 40 some winners of it in the history of the sport.
Well, like I've read, when you talked about it, it's just everything worked out for you. And that's the right attitude to have. Like everything has to fall perfectly in a line to win that event.
It does. And for your listeners that like to fish, you know how some days everything just goes right. You can't do anything wrong. You end up catching more fish than anybody else on the lake or on the river that day. It was just your day. You catch them early, you catch them midday, you catch them late in the day. You just catch them all day, and not every day is like that. In fact, they're seldom. And you have other days where everything goes wrong, and everybody around you's catching them, and you can't get a bite. I mean, we've all had that happen, but most days kind of fall in the middle of that, where you catch some. Yeah, but yeah, it was pretty awesome to have a day where everything went right, or 3 days in a row where everything went right in the World Championship.
Yeah, and so 2002 from 2007, from what I looked at, you were pretty much on fire. So in 2003, you were the Bassmaster Angler of the Year, and in 2002, you were the FLW Angler of the Year. You repeated that in 2007. And then in 2003, you also got that ESPY for the most outstanding outdoor athlete. So let's talk about the difference between Bassmaster and FLW, if you will, for a minute, for those that don't have any idea.
Yeah, there's been two professional bass fishing circuits for a long time. The Bassmasters is the original that started in 1967, and that was the only professional bass fishing circuit for 30 years, and then the FLW Tour started in 1996, and they've been going ever since. They just got bought out by Major League Fishing, so Major League Fishing absorbed the FLW Tour, and so today we still have two professional circuits. You've got the Bassmaster Tour, and then the Major League Fishing Tour, which is combined with FLW now. So yeah, there's two professional circuits, and it's kind of like, well, they're actually quite competitive with each other. I was going to say it's like the American League and National League in baseball, but it's not. They're not in the same league. They're two competitive entities, and but what's great is it gives more guys a chance to make a living at it, because there's two fields to participate in.
Yeah, you took a hiatus from Bassmasters for a while and only fished on FLW for a period of your career, right?
I did, yeah. So I started out with bass in '89, and I fished just the Bassmaster Tour through 2005. And then in 2006 to 2018, I fished the FLW Tour. And there was 2 or 3 years in there where I fished both tours, like 2001, 2002, 2003. And those actually were my best years, because I had a tournament, 3 weeks out of every month I had a tournament. It was crazy, but I couldn't keep that pace up because with a young family and all, and so I cut back to just one tour, and then in 2019 I went back to the Bassmaster Elite Series and finished my career there the last 4 years.
Yeah, I mean, quite a career. It's amazing. And so you were inducted into the Bass Fishing Hall of Fame in 2020. Describe that experience and what that meant to you, but also let's back up before we talk about that and talk about that ESPY Award, because a lot of people are familiar with the ESPYs. It's an ESPN event, and you've got all the athletes from basketball and football and tennis, and you're the outstanding outdoor athlete, representing your brand and your sport, out there alone, and that had to be quite an experience.
That was a huge honor, and that's held every year in Hollywood at the Kodak Theater. So they flew my wife Jill and I out to Hollywood first class, and I don't have time for all the stories, but I can tell you one fun one is when we got to the theater, they had a red carpet walk where everybody goes in, and all the different people that were nominated lined up, and they'd be introduced, and they'd walk up the red carpet into the theater, and they had a chain link fence on both sides of the carpet that was like 10 feet high, and to keep the fans back, it was just loaded with fans along both sides. And they put me in line right behind Eric Dickerson. No way, it was Emmett Smith, and then Serena Williams, and everybody's cheering for all these guys. And then they introduce, and now nominated for the Outdoor Athlete of the Year, Jay Yellas. And you could have heard a pin drop down there in Southern California. Nobody knew anything about professional bass fishing, but I ended up getting nominated, and I was fortunate enough to win it that year. And two of my competitors were Labrador Retrievers.
That's awesome.
Yeah, no. So, and then there was one of the Olympic marksman, a shooter, and I can't remember who the other nominees were, but that was right in the pinnacle of my career. There's only been 2 professional bass fishermen that have won that over the years, so I'm really thankful that it was my turn back in 2003.
Yeah, that's such a cool story. And so let's talk about recently this Hall of Fame induction. What did that feel like to you?
Oh, that was amazing. Yeah, that was that more than anything is probably a career pinnacle to be inducted into the Bass Fishing Hall of Fame, and that was just a tremendous honor. Because it recognizes the whole body of work over 35 years and it's not just for your performance, but it's also, I can't remember their mission statement, but it has something to do with your performance and having a positive impact on the fishing community or the culture of bass fishing. And so it's a tremendous honor. We went back for that, my wife and my daughters and my son-in-law, my mom and dad. We all flew back to Springfield for that ceremony, and I got to talk with my acceptance speech in front of everybody. All the industry is there. It's a huge banquet, black tie affair. So it was really neat to get up there and give God the glory. It was fun
to be recognized for all the things that you were able to do over that period of time. I mean, we talked before we got started too that you were in the top 10 for 5 decades. Just the way that your career spanned out was starting in 1989, and you were able to get in the top 10 right away, and then the 90s and the 2000s and then 2010 and then 2020 you were still doing it.
That's a very trivial fact about my career, but it's also one of the accomplishments that would be most difficult to duplicate, to have a top 10 finish on the Bassmaster Elite Series in 5 different decades. And my career just overlapped the late 80s and the early 2020s, but still it's trivial, but it's really hard to do.
Yeah, that's really neat. I think that's a really neat statistic. Technology-wise, over that time period, there had to be so much change.
Oh, my gosh. Yeah. Just in electronics, probably the biggest thing. Back in the 80s, we just had those Lowrance flashers. That was it. That's all we had was flashers. And then you ending your career with Garmin Live Scope and all the forward-facing sonar, which has revolutionized the sport. So, yeah, it's a lot of change over those 35 years.
Well, that type of technology, I'm sure you can see every rock almost compared to before you're just checking depth.
Yeah. I mean, you can see the fish swimming all around the boat. So, I mean, most of the pro tournaments now are won using the forward-facing sonar. It's, in fact, the Bass Elite Series this year, they've had 3 events so far, and all 3 were won. The winner was just looking at his catch on forward-facing sonar and then casting to him. And it's totally revolutionized the sport of bass fishing, and it's great for crappie fishing and any kind of fishing really, where you see the fish around the boat, and it's just really handy technology. But it's not. I tell people, ask me about that stuff all the time about forward-facing sonar. It takes a lot of hours to learn how to use that properly. It's not like you're just going to go buy it. It's expensive. I mean, you'll spend $4,000 on a unit and a live scope, transducer, and you just don't go out and spend $4,000, put it on your boat, and just start winning tournaments.
Become a tournament bass champion.
No,
Yeah,
it's like it takes so much training it takes dozens of hours to learn how to use it properly, so it's definitely a wonderful tool, but it takes some expertise to use it correctly.
Yeah, so let's talk about tournament preparation. I think a lot of people don't even know what goes into these tournaments. And so when I researched a little bit on that tournament that you won, you had fished it 30 days earlier for a 6-day practice window. And I read an article that you had found a spot where you're mostly catching stripers because there was really good bait fish and the way the currents worked out and stuff. But you didn't really catch any largemouth there. But you just knew it was a good fishy spot and you were going to go back there. But just in general, when you're preparing for a tournament, how much prep fishing do you normally get to do? Is it always standardized? Does it change depending on the tournament?
The tournament circuits have a standardized practice and an off-limits period also preceding each event. So typically, you can fish a lake up to within 30 days of the tournament. Then the lake goes off-limits for 30 days, and then you have a 3-day practice period before the competition starts. And so traveling to a lake 30 days before you compete doesn't do you any good as far as figuring out what the fish are doing, but it just helps you learn how to navigate if you've never been there and learn the playing field. And then when you go back for the actual event, you have 3 days to try to figure out what the fish are doing now and how to catch them.
And that's before the fishing starts?
That's before the competition starts. And it's a very important period of time. It's usually when the foundation is laid for either a good tournament or a really bad tournament, and it all depends on your practice approach and your strategies and how and that varies for everybody differently. Some guys spend their whole practice or most of it looking around on their electronics and not fishing much, just looking to see where the fish are. And then other guys like to just fish and get a bite to get confidence, and they know what the fish will bite. And so everybody has a different style during the practice period, but you don't want to catch a lot of fish during practice because bass won't bite again, for at least 30 days, typically. It's very rare to catch a fish one day and catch it again 2 days later, very rare. And so it's a fine art, practice is. You definitely don't want to burn your fish and catch them because they don't count in practice. So you want to find some fish, figure out how to catch them, but don't catch too many.
Yeah, and then weather patterns, obviously. If you're fishing one weather pattern and a storm front comes in, that could change your whole where you're going to go and what you're going to do.
Yeah, we've seen everything happen. We were at a tournament a couple years ago at Pickwick Lake in Alabama where it rained. It never stopped raining for 3 days of practice, and the lake came up and flooded. I mean, it came up 15 feet, and practice was totally useless, 100%. And
so everybody was on the same field at that point.
When the first day of the tournament, the lake was flooded and it had risen 15 feet, and it was a lowland reservoir. And anyway, so that was but most of that was the exception rather than the norm. Normally, the lakes stay pretty consistent, and then but the weather changes, and you'll have fronts, you'll have wind or no wind or sun or clouds or rain, and even those daily weather changes greatly affect how to catch the fish.
Yeah, you're switching up your gear probably. Mm-hmm. So also on that regard, when the tournament starts, there's a start time and an end time each day, right?
Right. Yeah, every day it's usually right about daylight, first safe light, and then the weigh-in starts at 3:00, and they stagger the check-in times. The guys that go out first have to come in first, and then the last flight that goes out, they come in usually 4:30 is the last flight. So that way that not everybody shows up at once, and then you have to wait an hour and a half to weigh your fish in. It's better for the fish to keep them in an aerated live well as long as possible.
That's good. And then is there penalties and stuff if you come in late where you lose some
it's
ounces
a pound per minute and then after 15 minutes late, your catch is disqualified for the day. So I've only been late a couple times in my career, and that was all because of the wind, and I was a long ways away. We were at Lake Champlain last summer, or 2 summers ago, and the darn weather forecast was like for 0 to 5 mile an hour winds, so I ran 80 miles down the lake. And it's a big open lake, and some of it's like 7 miles across. I mean, it's huge.
It's like being on the ocean
yeah,
when
and
that
I'm down
wind
there
picks
fishing,
up.
and I catch my fish, and the fishing was not quite as fast as I wanted it to be, and then at noon the wind started blowing, picking up, and I had to head back like at 1:30, and by 1 o'clock it was blowing 30 miles an hour, and there's no way I had such a, it was 80 miles from where I needed to be, and now I've got 3 and 4 foot waves, and I made it back, but I was late.
Yeah.
But I mean, my butt took quite a beating, I must say, that day.
Yeah. You were crashing your way back.
Yeah, professional bass fishing is not, it's a hard way to make a living because you're traveling a lot, you're always on the road. It's very competitive. You have to catch more fish than the best fishermen in the country, and then you have to deal with the weather and high winds and cold rain, this and that. You get beat up pretty good by the weather sometimes, and so it's tough.
You got to be ready for anything.
Oh yeah.
Is there restrictions in those tournaments as far as how you have to land a fish? Because sometimes on TV you'll see people with a net, and it's like they've got a designated netting person on the boat with them. Other times you'll see guys grab them or just kind of yard them in.
Yeah, they depends on the circuit that you're fishing, but I think the Elite Series and the Bass Pro Tour, both the top tours, don't allow nets. And they do that because it makes it more sporting and entertaining for the TV audience to try to land a fish with your hands.
And do you have to land it yourself? So
Yeah.
do you have to be grabbing the fish?
In the circuits that allow the use of a net, your partner that's in your boat, your amateur or in the boat, they can net the fish for you. When I fished the FLW tour, they allowed nets for a long, and so you were paired each day with an amateur as a pro-am style, and they could net your fish for you. Every now and then they'd knock them off.
Oh yeah.
And so a lot of times I would net my own fish.
Yeah, that's not a good way to make friends with a pro angler. Yeah.
No, it's happened. It happens to everybody though. They don't mean to, but people get excited with a net, especially with like crankbaits and stuff, and if there's a right way to net fish and a wrong way to net fish. You want to get them head first for one thing, and you don't want to get too excited and try to jab at them when they're still hot and running around, or you get treble hooks caught in the net, and that's usually how things go wrong in a hurry. If you have a crankbait with one treble hook in a fish and the other one in the net, usually the fish ends up getting away.
Back in the lake.
Yep.
Yeah. So, is there gear restrictions on the tournaments too, where you have certain gear that's allowed?
Yeah, there's certain restrictions, like the length of your rod. I think can be 8 feet is the longest rod you can use, and there's certain, like the Alabama rig style of baits, you cannot fish those. You have to fish one bait, and there may be some others I can't think of right now, but you have to use artificial lures. You can't use live bait. So there's some restrictions.
We've talked about that, how if you show up on a bass fishing trip and you have worms, like real live worms, none of the other bass fishermen are going to take you seriously.
Yeah.
Because, everybody fishes plastics of some type generally, or plugs or whatever. Mm-hmm. So, I wanted to talk a little bit about just other mishaps that can happen out there with, the sun, or with bugs, like if there's a bunch of mosquitoes on a lake, or, have you lost a lot of rods or snapped rods or dropped them in the water, or those types of kind of mishaps that happen while you're out there?
Oh yeah. There's always a lot of different things that can happen while you're fishing. And we've had one of the worst things in the Southeast is lightning that can happen. And guys get hit by lightning. There's been people killed by lightning. One time I was on Lake Tyler in Texas with a friend, and we were running down the lake, and we were on plane running about 30 miles an hour, and there was no boat wakes in there at all. And we had a rod on the front deck of my Skeeter boat, and it just blew out of the boat into the lake, which that's never happened before. And so we stopped the boat, and about 10 seconds later, like 100 feet in front of us, a huge lightning bolt cracked down on the water. So I was like, thank you, Lord, for having that rod blow out at just that right moment, or we might have been hit by lightning.
Just slow you down a little bit.
Oh, my gosh.
Wow.
Yeah, that's a true story.
Yeah, that's God looking out for you again.
That's right. But there's all kinds of stories of how you have fish. Guys will have fish in their boat, in their live well, and then they'll open the lid, and a fish will jump out and escape and go back in the lake. And there was one time, the Bassmaster Classic World Championship, this is probably 25 years ago, the guy had the winning fish, and we have measuring boards that we measure. Usually there's a minimum length. It has to be like, and I think in this case it was 14 inches. And so he was measuring the fish, and you could see, anybody watching the film could see it was easily over that length. And he was measuring, the measuring board was on the front deck of his bass boat. And as he measured the fish, he lost control of the fish. It squirmed out of his hands, and it flopped on the deck and went back in the lake.
Oh, no.
And it cost him winning the tournament and winning the world championship.
Wow.
And he was never the same after that. And he fished a couple more years and was gone. And
Talk about the one that got away.
That's the one that got away. So that's just the nature of fishing, though. Those darn fish, you'll get losing those fish. Usually they come off while they're hooked in the water, but every now and then you'll get one in the boat and it'll escape your capture as well. How
many rods are you normally taking when you go out?
Oh, you have about 7 or 8 on the front deck of your boat. And I know there's guys that'll have 20 out there. It's pretty crazy. I always liked it when I had maybe 4 or 5, because that meant you knew what the fish were biting on. You're pretty dialed in on how to catch them. And usually when you have too many rods on the front deck, it's a sign that you lack confidence and you're not sure what they're going to bite. And so you have everything out. And that's usually you don't do as well as when you're really confident and you know what you're going to catch them on going in.
Yeah. So I've got a few questions from my cousin Dylan, who's frequently on the show with me. He wanted to know your personal best fish. And I don't know if that was during tournament or just leisure fishing.
Actually, my best fish was during a tournament. It was 11 pounds and 11 ounces, and I caught it in a Bassmaster Top 100 at Lake Toho in Florida in 2001. And it was on a spawning bed. I saw it before I caught it.
That's awesome. And then he also asked, if the weather and watercolor is really going to change what you're going to be throwing out there generally. So you may have one plan and you get there and the water's a little murkier, or you get a little weather coming in. Are you changing right away, or are you going to throw out what you originally were going to start with?
Gosh, it does. There's so many different lures out there for bass fishing, and it's all. And the reason is there's so many different environments and conditions that you can fish in. And so, there's that's one of the things you want to be able to learn to read the water and look at the water clarity, the water depth, the water temperature, if it's windy or calm or cloudy or sunny. All those things factor into what you fish with. And color-wise, with soft plastics, like the darker colors, like a black and blue, is great when it's dark. But if it's a bright day or the middle of the day, like a more green pumpkin or brown is a better color. And usually, like with some other lures, like a spinnerbait or a chatterbait, usually a white is a great color, no matter what the conditions are. Sometimes you'll fish more of a darker color, like a green pumpkin, on those type baits. But crankbaits, usually you're trying to match what the fish are eating. Crawdads up here, crawdads are good. We don't have shad in Oregon, so in the South, shad-colored baits are really popular because that's what the fish are eating.
Did you have a favorite go-to as your fishing evolved that was like, okay, if things are tough, this is the one thing I'm going to throw out there?
Yeah, if it's tough, like a Senko is hard to beat. You can always catch fish on that. There's so many ways to rig it, from a Carolina rig to a shaky head, wacky rig, Texas rig. You can drop shot it. You can do everything with a Senko. So that's a good go-to when it's tough. But I'd much rather catch fish on a jig or spinnerbait, chatterbait.
Are you going to get a better hook set typically on one of those too?
Yeah, any lure with a single hook in it, you're going to get a better hook set than a treble hook, and you'll land a higher percentage of fish with a single hook as opposed to a treble.
The other question he had was, what's the most beautiful place you think you've ever fished?
Oh, that'd be a toss-up. I think Lake Powell in Arizona is just a phenomenal. It's like a phenomenal, beautiful place to fish. It's like you're fishing in the Grand Canyon.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine you've fished pretty much all over the country, right? And maybe all over the world with the way you fished and all the things you've done.
Yeah, that's a beauty. Clear Lake in California, I think that's one of my most beautiful lakes I've ever seen too, with Mount Konocti there on the horizon, and then back east there's some really pretty lakes too. Things are pretty flat back there though, so you don't have a lot of mountains and hills. I don't know, being up at Hood River and seeing Mount Hood in the background while you're catching smallmouth that's pretty spectacular too. So I would guess I'd have to say the west, the most beautiful fisheries are in the west, just because of all the mountains we have here.
We're spoiled. I don't think people
know
how spoiled we are until they go their places.
Yeah.
I know we've talked about all kinds of different things. I'm peppering you with questions, but I really looked through a lot of your statistics, and I think these ones were Bassmaster only stats, so it didn't have your FLW stuff, but it showed your total weight, and this is just on the bass side, was 6,704 pounds and 9 ounces of fish caught. So, 3 tons of fish. Now, I imagine if you add your FLW on top of that, that was probably double those numbers, would you think? Do you know your total poundage you've got?
Yeah, I don't know, but I fished FLW from 06 to 18, so 12 years, and I fished bass for 20 years or something like that. So it would be a little bit less. It's probably 4,000 to 5,000 pounds on FLW because it didn't do it as long as I fished bass, but that's a lot of bass.
That's 5 to 6 tons of bass.
That's a lot of bass.
That's unbelievable. I mean, it's just an amazing statistic. And at bass, you had a 71% win rate in the money.
To finish in the money, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's important because that's how you got to get paid. That's why we're out there. If you want to make a living, you need to get paid. So.
Yeah, and the numbers I found on FLW, this was just for the Tackle Warehouse Pro Circuit. You'd caught 950 total fish just on that particular circuit. And then there was other, tournaments that they separated it out from there.
Right.
But it's just the quantity of fish that you caught in your career is just amazing.
Yeah, well, that 35 years is a lot. Yeah, a lot of fishing, a lot of bass fishing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've caught enough bass for several lifetimes.
Right.
That's why when I'm home, I'd rather steelhead fish or salmon fish just because I've done so much bass fishing. I mean, that's all, that's been my job for 35 years. So I still love to fish, and Oregon's got so many great other species to fish for, and I love to eat fish. So I really enjoy, the diversity that we have up here.
And you were on track to make the big tournament again for the 17th time, and then you had some tendonitis going on in your...
Oh, last year, yeah, I did. I had, for the first time in my whole life, I got really bad tendonitis in both elbows from too much casting, just repetitiveness, and I think age had something to do with that too. But what caused that was braided line, and braid's a great fishing tool, but boy, it doesn't have any stretch, and so your elbows, wrists, shoulders are the ones that take the brunt of the blow when you're using braided line. And all the guys that I know in fishing that have ever had arm injuries, it's all because of braided line. So that's something to keep in mind as you're fishing, and especially for the younger guys listening. It's a great tool, but there's a price to pay.
Yeah.
And tendonitis is actually very common among professional fishermen, just because especially in the elbows, it's repetitive use.
Well, and you're fishing probably fairly high pound test generally, and the braid is, you have a high pound test, but it's a thinner line. But you fished left-handed and right-handed, so and you're
Right.
setting those hooks pretty aggressively, so and probably
You
getting hung
do.
up sometimes.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. You definitely want to use a hard hook set, but it's the 7 days in a row thing that gets you. You do something 7 days in a row, and then you get a week off, and you get another week fishing every day for a week, and you can't baby yourself either. You can't just set the hook half as hard as you normally would, because you'll probably miss that fish, and it's a bad cycle. Once something starts going south, it's hard to keep it from snowballing in the wrong direction as far as a bodily injury.
Yeah, you don't have enough recovery time between.
There is no recovery time, and so I think that caught up with me there at the end. But it's I was thankful I had 34 years of injury-free fishing, which is I'll take that. If you'd have told me back in the 80s I was going to have 34 years of injury-free fishing and then bad tendonitis in year 35, I'd have taken that in a heartbeat.
All day long.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I go out with my buddies now, and I'm liable to put a hook in their ear, So, I mean, you're doing pretty darn good. And the back to that note, when you get off of 7 days in a row of fishing like that, are you icing yourself down? Is there any kind of thing you do to try to recover?
No, you could ice and take an ibuprofen, to keep the swelling down for sure. But you can see the painful areas, they will swell up on you a little bit. So that helps. It's just like a pitcher, in baseball or softball when they want to ice their shoulder down after a game just to keep the swelling down.
Yeah. Well, I've got a couple more things to talk to you about, and the next thing on the list is kind of a recent topic in that walleye cheating that kind of came out. We all saw these kind of articles, and it hit the national stage. I just read an article last night that two of the people involved in that pled guilty, and they reduced their charges dramatically. I think they lost their boat and their truck, but they had thrown a whole bunch of charges at them, and because they wanted to make it a serious thing. How did you feel about that when that all went down? And is the cheating thing highly unlikely because it's so regulated that it probably wouldn't happen in the bass circuits?
First of all, it was awful with those guys. I mean, it was criminal behavior, and it's just funny the things that people will do for an ego stroke to win an event, and they'll cheat to win a fishing tournament. That's just crazy, but there's people out there that'll do that. So, on the professional bass fishing side, there really is no way to cheat and win because you have a live camera in your boat filming your every move all day long.
Yeah.
It's impossible.
There's no way you're slipping some lead weights in the stomach.
No, but that walleye circuit, they don't have cameras in the boats, and it's a team tournament. The other thing in the bass fishing, they're on the pro level, there's no team tournaments. The closest thing would be a pro-am, where a pro and an amateur are paired together for a day of fishing, but the pairing is always random, and it always occurs the evening before you go fishing the next day. So you have no time to scheme or plan to cheat with somebody because you don't know who you're fishing with until the night before. So those things have kept cheating in bass fishing to a minimum. And there's, like I say, it's impossible on the Elite Series or the Bass Pro Tour to cheat because you have a live camera in your boat. But yeah, it's at the smaller level. There's smaller, like a state, local team tournament or a walleye tournament or a bass tournament. Sure, you could get away with cheating at the team tournament level. But the thing of it, guys know that if they ever get caught, they're done.
Yeah, and why would you want to, especially on a local tournament with a small purse or whatever?
And that totally takes the challenge away. I mean, I can't imagine the mindset, but anyway, I thought it was awful, but I'm glad they caught them, and we don't need any of that in fishing. It's too great of a sport to cheat at, by sure.
Yeah, and I know I read, a story on you when you retired, and you said, I'm retiring from the circuit, but I'm still going to be fishing. So you're not turning up your rods. You're still going to be out there fishing. But, let's shift gears and talk about what you're doing now. So I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, you're the executive director for Cast for Kids. And maybe that's I don't have your title quite right. But tell us, share with us what Cast for Kids is for someone that has no idea what that program is. I know the research I did that it came out in 1991, and that you've hosted as an organization 1,140 events in total. And I read a quote from you that we're in 35 states, and there's going to be 80 events coming up, this coming season for Cast for Kids. But tell us more about, the other stat that I had was there was 150,000 disabled and disadvantaged kids that have gotten on the water thanks to that organization. So tell us kind of your involvement. I think you've been involved with them for about 8 years, but clear up anything I said wrong there.
Sure. Yeah, the Cast for Kids Foundation is a nonprofit charity, and we exist to enrich the lives of children with special needs through the sport of fishing. And so they're put on one-day fishing events for special needs kids, and they come with their caretaker, their parent or guardian, and they're paired up with a volunteer to enjoy a morning of fishing, and that's followed by a lunch for everybody, and then an award ceremony where we celebrate each child. They get an award plaque with their photo in it. Everybody cheers for them, and it's just a wonderful day for those kids. They just love it because they don't have an opportunity to be celebrated very often, and that a lot of them have never been fishing before. So we're introducing them to a new hobby. Fishing is something that anybody can enjoy, no matter what your physical or mental limitation is. You can still enjoy going fishing. So it's a great charity. It started in 1991, and I was asked to be on the board of directors in 2005. So I was on the board for 10 years. And then when the founder retired in 2014, I moved from being a board member to being the executive director. And so I'm running the foundation on a day-to-day basis. So I've been doing that, you're right, for about 8 years. This is my 8th year. And I just really passionate about it. It's a great way to give back and share my love of fishing with some kids that would never otherwise get an opportunity to go fishing. And it's so much fun. So you're right. I retired from pro fishing into a full-time job of running the Cast for Kids Foundation. So we have events all over the country, and like you said, about 35 states. And we'll have 5 or 6 in Oregon this year, and you go to our website and see where those are at. The website is castforkids.org.
And I'll post that with the podcast.
Yeah. So, the events are all volunteer driven. We have volunteer coordinators. Like our friend Brent Norlander, he coordinates an event in Jefferson. It's going to be on June 3rd this year. And then we have a lot of volunteers that come out to take the kids fishing and work with the kids. We have an event in Oregon. We have events at Hag Lake in September, Emigrant Lake, which is down by Medford. That's in June. We have the Jefferson event in June, and then we have one up by Canby in May. And that's all I think that we have. We were going to have one at Lake Prineville, but there's no water in the lake at Prineville somehow it's still super low. I don't know. Hopefully that lake will get some water back in it soon. But you can, if you see an event you want to come to, you can come out and volunteer and fish with a child, or you can, if there's listeners that know of a special needs child that would like to go fishing, they can register online. And you can find it all on the website there, how to register for the events. And it's a special day. Most of the events that we have in Oregon are boating events, but we have a couple shore fishing events also. So at the boating events, volunteers bring their boat, and they welcome the child and their parent or guardian into their boat, and they take them out and fish for about 3 hours and help teach them how to fish, hopefully catch a few and get to share the joy of catching fish with these kids that have never done it before. It's really we say we come out and volunteer just to bless the kids, but usually the volunteers are the ones that get a lot out of it, and they come back year after year. So that's a neat program.
Yeah, when I read when you were talking about your retirement and you said, you're heading into this as a full-time thing, and it was, I don't want to mess up the quote exactly, but you were along the lines of like, you get to see that enrichment almost instantly, just to go and enrich a child's life and in that moment and be able to see how magical that is for the child.
It is. These kids it's an underserved population group, the special needs community, and people they're really underrepresented too, like on TV or in the media, or they're just pretty much stay, out of the public eye for the most part. And so they hardly ever get days that are designed just for them, where they are the center of attention and everybody's there to serve them. And so it's a really wonderful day for the kids, and their parents just love it. And that the people are there to bless their kids and give them a great day. So yeah, it's something I really enjoy doing it, and it's been fun watching it grow. We've grown a lot since I took it over in 2015, and we have events all over the place. Well, actually, this year I counted this morning. It looks like we'll have about 94 events nationwide, which will be an all-time high in the 31 years that we've been, of the lifespan of the Cast for Kids Foundation.
That's awesome. And I mean, what a cool thing to, it's probably a little slower pace than what you had, but you're probably staying pretty busy.
Oh, yeah.
You retired into doing a bunch more work.
Yeah, it's a new challenge. I kind of enjoy it because we have a staff of 8 people, and my challenge is not catching fish. Now it's, leading a small team to grow and be successful so we can serve more of these kids. And it's just something fun that I'm enjoying. I get to pick my team. I'm kind of like the coach of a team, and I get to pick the employees that we have, and got some really good ones, on staff. So we're excited about that.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I really appreciate you coming. I mean, first time I got to meet you, and to me, you're it's like you are a professional athlete. And for me, meeting you, I was really excited just to be able to meet you, as I've talked to you on the phone a few times, and you're just this humble, great, nice guy who loves Jesus and loves his community.
Amen.
And wants to serve people who had an awesome fishing career,
Yeah.
And it's been great spending an
Thanks,
hour with
Sam.
you.
Yeah, I've enjoyed it, and be glad to come back and be your guest again someday.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you, Jay.
Sure, you bet.
Appreciate it.